Three Men in a Boat by Jerome K. Jerome. There were four of us, George and William Samuel Harris and myself and Montmorency. We were sitting in my room, smoking, and talking about how bad we were. Bad from a medical point of view, I mean, of course. We were all feeling seedy, and we were getting quite nervous about it. Harris said he felt such extraordinary fits of giddiness come over him at times that he hardly knew what he was doing. And then George said that he had fits of giddiness too and hardly knew what he was doing. With me, it was my liver that was out of order. I knew it was my liver that was out of order because I'd just been reading a patent liver pill circular, in which were detailed various symptoms by which a man could tell when his liver was out of order. I had them all. It is a most extraordinary thing, but I never read a patent medicine advertisement without being impelled to the conclusion that I am suffering from the particular disease therein dealt with in its most virulent form. The diagnosis seems in every case to correspond exactly with all the sensations that I have ever felt. Going back to the liver pill circular, I had the symptoms beyond all mistake, the chief among them being a general disinclination to work of any kind. Why I suffer in that way, no tongue can tell. From my earliest infancy, I've been a martyr to it. As a boy, the disease hardly ever left me for a day. They did not know then that it was my liver. Medical science was in a far less advanced state than now, and they used to put it down to laziness. We sat there for half an hour, describing to each other our maladies. I explained to George and William Harris how I felt when I got up in the morning, and William Harris told us how he felt when he went to bed, and George stood on the hearthrug and gave us a clever and powerful piece of acting, illustrative of how he felt in the night. George fancies he's ill, but there's never anything really the matter with him, you know. At this point, Mrs. Poppets knocked at the door to know if we were ready for supper. We smiled sadly at one another and said we supposed we'd better try to swallow a bit. Harris said a little something in one's stomach often kept the disease in check, and Mrs. Poppets brought the tray in, and we drew up to the table and toyed with a little steak and onions and some rhubarb tart. I must have been very weak at the time, because I know, after the first half hour or so, I seemed to take no interest whatever in my food, an unusual thing for me, and I didn't want any cheese. This duty done, we refilled our glasses, lit our pipes, and resumed the discussion upon our state of health. What it was that was actually the matter with us, we none of us could be sure of, but the unanimous opinion was that it, whatever it was, had been brought on by overwork. "What we want is rest," said Harris. "Rest and a complete change," said George. "Change of scene and absence of the necessity for thought will restore the mental equilibrium." I agreed with George and suggested that we should seek out some retired and old-world spot far from the madding crowd and dream away a sunny week among its drowsy lanes. Some half-forgotten nook, hidden away by the fairies, out of reach of the noisy world. Some quaint perched Eyrie on the cliffs of time, from whence the surging waves of the 19th century would sound far off and faint. Harris said he thought it would be humpy. He said he knew the sort of place I meant, where everybody went to bed at 8 o'clock and you had to walk 10 miles to get your baccy. "No," said Harris, "if you want rest and change, you can't beat a sea trip." I objected to the sea trip strongly. A sea trip does you good when you're going to have a couple of months of it, but for a week it is wicked. You start on Monday with the idea implanted in your bosom that you're going to enjoy yourself. You wave an airy adieu to the boys on shore, light your biggest pipe, and swagger about the deck as if you were Captain Cook, Sir Francis Drake, and Christopher Columbus all rolled into one. On Tuesday, you wish you hadn't come. On Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, you wish you were dead. On Saturday, you're able to swallow a little beef tea and to sit up on deck and answer with a wan, sweet smile when kind-hearted people ask how you feel now. On Sunday, you begin to walk again and take solid food. And on Monday morning, as with your bag and umbrella in your hand you stand by the gunwale waiting to step ashore, you begin to thoroughly like it. George said, "Let's go up the river." He said we should have some fresh air, exercise, and quiet, The constant change of scene would occupy our minds, including what there was of Harris's, and the hard work would give us a good appetite and make us sleep well. Harris said he didn't think George ought to do anything that would have a tendency to make him sleepier than he always was, as it might be dangerous. He said he didn't very well understand how George was going to sleep any more than he did now, seeing that there were only 24 hours in each day, summer and winter alike, but thought that if he did sleep any more, he might just as well be dead, and so save his board and lodging. Harris said, however, that the river would suit him to a T. I don't know what a tea is, except a sixpenny one, which includes bread and butter and cake ad lib, and is cheap at the price, if you haven't had any dinner. It seems to suit everybody, however, which is greatly to its credit. It suited me to a tea, too, and Harris and I both said it was a good idea of George's, and we said it in a tone that seemed to somehow imply that we were surprised that George should have come out so sensible. The only one who was not struck with the suggestion was Montmorency. He never did care for the river, did Montmorency. "It's all very well for you fellows," he says. "You like it, but I don't. There's nothing for me to do. Scenery is not in my line, and I don't smoke. If I see a rat, you won't stop, and if I go to sleep, you get fooling about with a boat and slop me overboard. If you ask me, I call the whole thing bally foolishness." We were 3-1, however, and the motion was carried. We pulled out the maps and discussed plans. We arranged to start on the following Saturday from Kingston. Harris and I would go down in the morning and take the boat up to Chertsey, and George, who would not be able to get away from the city till afternoon — George goes to sleep at a bank from 10 to 4 each day, except Saturdays when they wake him up and put him outside at 2 — would meet us there. Should we camp out or sleep at inns? George and I were for camping out. We said it would be so wild and free, so patriarchal-like. Slowly the golden memory of the dead sun fades from the hearts of the cold, sad clouds. Silent, like sorrowing children, the birds have ceased their song, and only the moorhen's plaintive cry and the harsh croak of the corncrake stirs the awed hush around the couch of waters, where the dying day breathes out her last. Then we run our little boat into some quiet nook, and the tent is pitched, and the frugal supper cooked and eaten. The big pipes are filled and lighted, and the pleasant chat goes round in musical undertone, while in the pauses of our talk the river, splashing round the boat, prattles strange old tales and secrets, sings low the old child's song that it has sung so many thousand years. Harris said, "How about when it rained?" You could never rouse Harris. There is no poetry about Harris, no wild yearning for the unattainable. Harris never weeps he knows not why. If Harris's eyes fill with tears, you can bet it's because Harris has been eating raw onions, or has put too much Worcester sauce over his chop. We therefore decided that we would sleep out on fine nights, and hotel it and inn it and pub it, like respectable folks, when it was wet, or when we felt inclined for a change. Montmorency hailed this compromise with much approval. He does not revel in romantic solitude. Give him something noisy, and if a trifle low, so much the jollier. To look at Montmorency, you would imagine that he was an angel sent upon the earth, for some reason withheld from mankind, in the shape of a small fox terrier. There is a sort of, "Oh, what a wicked world this is, and how I wish I could do something to make it better and nobler" expression about Montmorency that has been known to bring the tears into the eyes of pious old ladies and gentlemen. When first he came to live at my expense, I never thought I should be able to get him to stop long. I used to sit down and look at him, and he sat on the rug and looked up at me, and think, "Oh, that dog will never live. He will be snatched up to the bright skies in a chariot. That is what will happen to him." But when I had paid for about a dozen chickens that he'd killed, and had dragged him, growling and kicking by the scruff of his neck, out of 114 street fights, and had had a dead cat brought round for my inspection by an irate female who called me a murderer, and had been summoned by the man next door but one for having a ferocious dog at large, that had kept him pinned up in his own tool shed, afraid to venture his nose outside the door for over 2 hours on a cold night, and had learned that the gardener, unknown to myself, had won 30 shillings by backing him to kill rats against time, then I began to think that maybe they'd let him remain on earth for a bit longer after all. To hang about a stable and collect a gang of the most disreputable dogs to be found in the town, and lead them out to march round the slums to fight other disreputable dogs, is Montmorency's idea of life. And so, as I before observed, he gave to the suggestion of inns and pubs and hotels his most emphatic approbation. Having thus settled the sleeping arrangements to the satisfaction of all four of us, the only thing left to discuss was what we should take with us. And this we had begun to argue when Harris said he'd had enough oratory for one night and proposed that we should go out and have a smile, saying that he'd found a place round by the square where you could really get a drop of Irish worth drinking. George said he felt thirsty. I never knew George when he didn't. And as I had a presentiment that a little whisky, warm with a slice of lemon, would do my complaint good, the debate was, by common assent, adjourned to the following night, and the assembly put on its hats and went out. So, on the following evening, we again assembled to discuss and arrange our plans. Harris said, "Now, the first thing to settle is what to take with us. Now, you get a bit of paper and write things down, Jay, and you get the grocery catalogue, George, and somebody give me a bit of pencil, and then I'll make out a list." That's Harris all over, so ready to take the burden of everything himself and put it on the backs of other people. I said I could not permit him to take so much labour upon himself. I said, "No, you get the paper and the pencil and the catalogue, and George write down, and I'll do the work." The first list we made out had to be discarded. It was clear that the upper reaches of the Thames would not allow of the navigation of a boat sufficiently large to take the things we had set down as indispensable. So we tore the list up and looked at one another. George said, "You know, we're on the wrong track altogether. We must not think of the things we could do with, but only of the things we can't do without." George comes out really quite sensible at times. You'd be surprised. I call that downright wisdom, not merely as regards the present case, but with reference to our trip up the river of life generally. How many people, on that voyage, load up the boat till it is in danger of swamping with a store of foolish things which they think essential to the pleasure and comfort of the trip, but which are really only useless lumber. It is lumber, man, all lumber, throw it overboard. Let your boat of life be light, packed with only what you need, a homely home and simple pleasures, one or two friends worth the name, someone to love and someone to love you, a cat, a dog, and a pipe or two, enough to eat and enough to wear, and a little more than enough to drink. For thirst is a dangerous thing. You will find the boat easier to pull then, and it will not be so liable to upset. You will have time to think as well as to work, time to drink in life's sunshine, time to listen to the aeolian music that the wind of God draws from the human heartstrings around us, time I beg your pardon, really, I quite forgot. Well, we left the list to George, and he began it. "We won't take a tent," suggested George. "We will have a boat with a cover. It is ever so much simpler and more comfortable." It seemed a good thought, and we adopted it. I don't know whether you've ever seen the thing I mean. You fix iron hoops up over the boat and stretch a huge canvas over them, and fasten it down all round from stem to stern, and it converts the boat into a sort of little house, and it is beautifully cosy, though a trifle stuffy. But there, everything has its drawbacks, as the man said when his mother-in-law died, and they came down upon him for the funeral expenses. George said that in that case we must take a rug each, a lamp, some soap, a brush and comb between us, a toothbrush each, a basin, some tooth powder, some shaving tackle. Sounds like a French exercise, doesn't it? And a couple of big towels for bathing. I notice that people always make gigantic arrangements for bathing when they're going anywhere near the water, but that they don't bathe much when they're there. It's the same when you go to the seaside. I always determine, when thinking over the matter in London, that I'll get up early every morning and go and have a dip before breakfast, and I religiously pack up a pair of drawers and a bath towel. I always get red bathing drawers. I rather fancy myself in red drawers. They suit my complexion so.